My name is Cora Townsend, and I was 18 years old when I found out my parents had drained every single dollar of my $224,000 college fund to pay for my brother's destination wedding in Tuscany. A wedding I was told the venue covered. 3 weeks before my first semester at the University of Michigan, I opened a bank statement that read $0.00. When I asked my mom and dad for an explanation, my father looked me in the eye and said, "Ryan needed a strong start to his marriage." My mother added, "You can take loans like everyone else." My entire extended family called me materialistic for being upset. So I made one phone call to my grandfather, a retired CPA. What the forensic accountant uncovered didn't just find the missing money. It dismantled my parents' 30-year marriage. Before we get into the receipts, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It really helps. Now let me take you back to the summer before everything changed. I grew up in Shelby Township, Michigan, a suburb where the lawns are manicured with mathematical precision and the silence of the streets at night is a point of neighborhood pride. My father, Greg, was a man of systems. A branch manager for a regional insurance company who saw the world through the lens of risk assessment and depreciating assets. My mother, Diane, was a part-time real estate agent who treated our social standing like a high-stakes closing deal. In our house, there was a very specific unspoken hierarchy, and I learned early on that my role was to be the reliable investment. Then there was my brother, Ryan. Ryan was the speculative asset that my parents couldn't stop pouring capital into, hoping for a turnaround that never came. The contrast between us started long before the $224,000 vanished. While I was in middle school, I started a neighborhood pet-sitting business. I had a color-coded binder with emergency contacts, dietary restrictions for every dog on the block, and a ledger where I tracked every dollar earned. By 14, I had saved enough to buy my own laptop for school. My parents praised my industrious spirit, but they never offered to chip in. They didn't have to. Cora was self-sufficient. Cora was handled. Ryan, however, was never handled. When he turned 16, he crashed the used sedan my parents bought him within 3 months. Instead of making him take the bus or work to pay for the repairs, my father sighed, talked about the learning curve of manhood, and bought him a newer, safer SUV. When Ryan's grades plummeted because he was spending his nights at parties, my mother hired a private tutor at $60 an hour, claiming Ryan just processed information differently and needed a bespoke educational environment. I was the daughter who checked her own oil levels every Sunday and maintained a 3.9 GPA while working 20 hours a week at a local diner. I funneled every paycheck into a high-yield savings account because I knew my parents' contribution was a finite promise, and I wanted to be certain I could afford the University of Michigan. I was the kid who didn't ask for much, the one who stayed under the radar because I thought that was how you earned respect. Ryan was the son who dropped out of 3 different community colleges because he couldn't find his vibe, yet he always had the latest iPhone and a wardrobe that cost more than my tuition for a full semester. By the time I was 18, I had meticulously planned my future. I had the spreadsheets to prove it. Between my personal savings and the $224,000 college fund my grandfather, a retired CPA, had set up for me when I was born, I was set. I wasn't just going to college, I was going to graduate debt-free. That fund was my ticket out of Shelby Township. It was the physical manifestation of my grandfather's belief in me, the only person who seemed to notice that I was working twice as hard for half the recognition. While I was calculating credits and looking at dorm floor plans, the atmosphere in our house shifted. Ryan had met a girl, Chloe, whose family came from old money in Grosse Pointe. Suddenly, the status quo of Ryan's aimless life was replaced by a feverish, expensive ambition. He wasn't just getting married. He was hosting a celebration of life wedding in Tuscany. 4 months. The dining room table was buried under Italian tourism brochures and swatches of silk. Ryan and Chloe were scouting 5-star villas and talking about chartered flights for the wedding party. I remember sitting there one evening, smelling of the grease from my shift at the diner, watching my mother gush over a florist's invoice that was larger than my annual car insurance premium. "How are they paying for this?" I asked, my voice flat. "Ryan hasn't worked a full-time job since he quit the landscaping crew in May." My mother didn't even look up from the brochure. "The venue offered a package deal, Cora. And Chloe's parents are being very generous." My father added without looking away from the news, "Don't worry about the adults' business, Cora. Just focus on your orientation." I took them at their word. Why wouldn't I? In my mind, money was a stagnant physical thing. My college fund was in an account I had seen statements for since I was 10 years old. It was a pillar of my reality. I didn't worry because I didn't think it was possible for good suburban parents to steal from their own child. I spent that final summer working double shifts, coming home exhausted, watching Ryan lounge by the pool and talk about his custom Italian suit fittings. I told myself it didn't matter. In August I'd be in Ann Arbor, starting my own life, finally free from the shadow of the golden child. The first red flag wasn't a shouting match. It was a thin white envelope from the bank that arrived on a Tuesday morning in late July. Usually, the quarterly statements for the trust were thick, stapled documents with multiple pages of interest growth and asset allocation. This was a single sheet of paper. I opened it standing in the kitchen, still wearing my apron. The statement didn't show growth. It didn't show a balance. It was a closing statement for an account that was supposed to hold my entire future. The final balance read, $0. The room didn't spin. Instead, the world became incredibly, painfully sharp. I looked at the date of the last withdrawal. It was the same week Ryan had booked the Tuscan villa. I looked at the signatures authorized for the transfer. Greg and Diane Townsend. In that moment, the status quo of our family didn't just crack. It vanished. I realized that my parents didn't see that $224,000 as my future. They saw it as a surplus they could use to buy Ryan's entry into a social class they had always envied. I was the reliable investment they had just liquidated to fund a speculative asset. I stood in that silent, perfectly manicured kitchen and realized I wasn't just the invisible child. I was the bank. And the bank was officially closed. I stood in that kitchen for what felt like hours, the bank statement trembling in my hand. The silence of the house, usually so peaceful, now felt like it was suffocating me. Every tick of the designer clock on the wall felt like a physical blow. $224,000. It wasn't just a number. It was every late-night study session, every missed social event, and the literal legacy of my grandfather's hard work, evaporated to fund a party in another country. When the garage door finally groaned open, signaling my father's return from work, my heart hammered against my ribs. I heard him whistling, a light, carefree tune. He walked into the kitchen, tossing his keys on the granite island, and stopped when he saw me. He didn't see the statement at first, he just saw my face. "Cora, you look like you've seen a ghost," he said, reaching for the refrigerator. I didn't speak. I simply laid the paper on the island, right next to his keys. I watched his eyes track down to the red account closed stamp and the final balance of $0. The whistling stopped. He didn't look up. He didn't gasp. He just sighed, a long, weary sound that made me feel like I was the one being difficult. "Cora, we were going to sit you down this weekend and explain," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Explain what, Dad? That you stole my life savings? That you took the money Grandpa specifically put in my name and gave it to Ryan for a wedding he can't afford?" My mother walked in then, carrying shopping bags from an upscale boutique. More items for the Tuscany trip, no doubt. She saw the tension and immediately went into fixer mode. "Oh, sweetie, you found the letter," she said, her voice dripping with a forced, honeyed sympathy that made my skin crawl. "We were trying to find the right way to tell you. But you have to understand the bigger picture here. This is about family." Family. I choked out the word. I am part of this family. My education is part of this family. How is taking my future and giving it to Ryan about family? This is when the shift happened. The mask of the perfect suburban parents began to slip, replaced by the cold, defensive logic of the gaslighter. "Don't be so dramatic, Cora," my mother said, beginning to unpack her bags as if we were discussing a change in dinner plans. "You're acting like we threw the money into a fire. We invested it in your brother. Ryan is finally settling down. Chloe's family, they expect a certain level of presentation. Ryan needed a strong start to his marriage, and this wedding is a cornerstone of that." "A strong start," I shouted. "He's 30 years old. He hasn't held a job for more than 6 months in his entire life. If he needs a strong start, he needs a resume, not a chartered flight to Italy paid for with my tuition." My father stepped closer, his shadow falling over the statement. "Watch your tone. We are your parents. That money was under our stewardship. We made a decision that benefited the family unit as a whole. You're 18. You have your whole life ahead of you. You're smart, you're disciplined, you can take loans like everyone else." Loans. I felt the room shrinking. "I had $224,000, Dad. I don't need loans. I didn't want loans. Grandpa didn't want me to have loans." "Your grandfather is old, Cora," my father snapped, his patience finally breaking. "He doesn't understand the pressures of the modern world. He doesn't understand what it takes to maintain our position. Ryan's marriage into the Grosse Pointe crowd is an opportunity for all of us. It's an investment in our collective future." "Collective." I laughed, a bitter, jagged sound. "What do I get out of it? A front row seat to watch my brother pretend to be rich while I spend the next 20 years paying off interest on money I already owned? You didn't invest in us. You sacrificed me for him." Again. My mother set down a silk dress she was holding and looked at me with a coldness I had never seen before. "You are being incredibly materialistic, Cora. To think that money is more important than your brother's happiness. It's disappointing. We raised you to be better than that. You're being selfish and vindictive over a bank account." The word materialistic hit me like a physical punch. I was the one working double shifts. I was the one who hadn't bought new clothes in 2 years. I was the one who stayed home to study while they took Ryan on celebratory dinners. And now, because I wanted the money that was legally and morally mine, I was the one with the character flaw. "I'm materialistic?" I whispered. "You just spent $250,000 on a 3-day party to impress people you don't even like, and I'm the materialistic one?" "Enough," my father barked, slamming his hand on the counter. "This conversation is over. We are the heads of this household. The money is gone. It has been spent. You will go to Michigan, you will fill out your FAFSA, and you will stop this temper tantrum immediately. If you mention this to your grandfather and upset him in his condition, there will be serious consequences. Do you understand?" They stood there, a united front of suburban respectability, looking down at me as if I were a disobedient child who had broken a vase, rather than a young woman whose life they had just derailed. They expected me to crumble. They expected me to do what I had always done: sigh, lower my head, and find a way to make it work so they wouldn't have to deal with the mess of my emotions. They thought that because I was the good kid, I didn't have teeth. "I understand," I said, my voice suddenly very quiet. I picked up the bank statement. "Good," my mother said, turning back to her shopping bags. "Now, let's talk about what you're going to wear to the rehearsal dinner in Florence." I found the most darling. "I'm not going to Florence," I said. She stopped. "Don't be silly, Cora. The flights are already booked." "Then I hope the seat is comfortable for your collective future," I said, walking toward the door. "Because I'm done being your safety net." I walked out of that kitchen, through the house that felt like a museum of my parents' vanity, and straight to my car. As I pulled out of the driveway, I saw my father standing in the window watching me. He looked annoyed, not worried. He still thought he was in control. He still thought no wasn't a word I was allowed to use. I didn't head to a friend's house. I didn't go to the diner. I drove straight to my grandfather's small, sun-drenched home 3 towns over. My parents thought I wouldn't call him because I didn't want to upset him. They forgot that Grandpa wasn't just an old man. He was a retired forensic accountant who spent 40 years finding people who thought they could hide money in the shadows. I pulled into his driveway, the zero balance statement sitting on the passenger seat like a ticking bomb. My parents had spent 30 years building a perfect life on a foundation of gaslighting and favoritism. They didn't realize that I was about to hand the wrecking ball to the only man they were actually afraid of. The drive to my grandfather's house was a blur of suburban landscapes and simmering rage. My grandfather, Arthur, was not your typical retiree. He didn't spend his days golfing or complaining about the HOI. He spent them in a sun-drenched home office filled with filing cabinets and a computer setup that would intimidate a NASA engineer. For 40 years he had been a forensic accountant, the kind of man companies called when millions went missing and the paper trail seemed to vanish into thin air. He was a man who believed that while people lie, spreadsheets always tell the truth. When I pulled into his driveway, he was on the porch, watering his hydrangeas with the same methodical precision he used to audit Fortune 500 companies. He saw my face, saw the white envelope in my hand, and simply turned off the hose. "Cora," he said, his voice a steady anchor. "You look like you've just discovered a rounding error that changes everything." I didn't cry. I didn't have the energy for it. I just handed him the bank statement. We went inside, the air smelling of old paper and peppermint tea. He put on his reading glasses, laid the statement on his mahogany desk, and studied it in silence for 5 full minutes. $0.00, he whispered, more to himself than to me. "I put that money in a restricted trust, Cora. Your father was the custodian, but the language was clear. For educational expenses or housing. Not for a circus in Italy. They said they invested it in the family, Grandpa." I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "They told me I was being materialistic for wanting it back. They told me to take out loans." My grandfather looked up, and for the first time in my life, I saw a flicker of genuine coldness in his eyes. It wasn't directed at me. It was directed at the son-in-law he had never fully trusted. "Greg always had a taste for the finer things on someone else's dime," Arthur said. "He thinks because he's the custodian, he's the owner. He's about to learn the difference between stewardship and theft. He didn't just give me a hug and a check for my tuition. That's what a normal grandfather would do. But Arthur knew that if he just paid my way, my parents would keep gaslighting me. They would see it as a win. They got the wedding and Cora got her school. But Arthur wanted the truth on the table. "Cora, sit down," he commanded, pulling a fresh legal pad from his drawer. "We aren't just going to look for your college fund. If they were willing to drain a restricted trust, they were willing to move other things. Your mother's real estate commissions, the equity in the house, the tax returns from the last 3 years. We're going to perform a full-scale audit of the Townsend household." For the next 6 hours we worked. It was the most intense education I had ever received. He taught me about the manila folder logic. The idea that you never walk into a confrontation without physical proof that leaves no room for debate. We logged into my grandfather's old professional database. Because he had set up several of their initial investments, he still had secondary access to the parent accounts. What we found wasn't just a missing $224,000. It was a house of cards. "Look here," Arthur said, pointing to a series of transfers from 6 months ago. "This isn't just your tuition. This is a $50,000 consulting fee paid out from your father's joint business account to a shell company registered in your mother's name. But look at the destination of the funds after that." I leaned in, squinting at the digital ledger. The $50,000 hadn't gone to the wedding. It had gone to a private bank account in the Cayman Islands that my father didn't know existed. My mother wasn't just helping Ryan. She was building a life raft for herself. And then we found the second trail. My father had been skimming from his own company's bonus pool, borrowing against his future commissions to pay for the down payments on Ryan's previous failed business ventures. Ventures my mother never knew about. They weren't a united front. They were two people stealing from each other, using my future as the currency to keep the peace. They've been playing a game of financial musical chairs for a decade, Cora, Grandpa said, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he compiled the data into a single devastating spreadsheet. Ryan's wedding wasn't just a celebration. It was the catalyst that finally ran them out of chairs. By midnight we had it all. A thick, physical folder, the receipts. It contained the wire transfer records of my college fund, the evidence of my mother's secret account, and the documentation of my father's creative accounting at his firm. "This is the nuclear option," Arthur said, tapping the folder. "If you open this, there is no going back to Sunday dinners and pretending everything is fine. This will dismantle them." I thought about my mother calling me materialistic. I thought about my father telling me my future was material for his collective goal. I thought about the sheer arrogance of two people who thought they could erase my hard work to paint a prettier picture for their social circle. "I was the kid who didn't ask for much, Grandpa," I said, my voice finally steady. "But I'm asking for this. I want them to see what they actually are." "Then we don't call them," Arthur said, a grim smile playing on his lips. "We don't send an email. Tomorrow night is the Bon Voyage dinner at the country club. The whole extended family will be there. The Grosse Pointe crowd will be there. Ryan will be there talking about his Tuscan sunrise." He handed me the folder. It was heavy. It felt like justice. "You're going to walk into that room, Cora. And you're going to show them exactly what that $224,000 bought them." I left his house that night with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. The curiosity gap my parents had used to keep me in the dark was gone. I knew the numbers. I knew the secrets. I knew that by this time tomorrow the status quo of the Townsend family wouldn't just be changed. It would be incinerated. I didn't go home. I stayed at a hotel. I needed a good night's sleep. Because tomorrow I wasn't just the invisible child anymore. I was the auditor. And I was coming to collect. The following morning I went to a local print shop. I didn't just want one copy of the receipts. I wanted 12. I spent the afternoon precisely organizing each folder. I used tab dividers. Exhibit A, the trust theft. Exhibit B, the secret Cayman account. Exhibit C, the corporate skimming. I was no longer a victim of a family betrayal. I was the lead prosecutor in the trial of Greg and Diane Townsend. I could see the scene at the country club in my mind. The white linen tablecloths, the scent of expensive lilies, the clinking of champagne flutes as my brother toasted to a future built on stolen money. My parents would be at the head of the table, basking in the reflected glow of Ryan's success, pretending they were the benevolent architects of this grand union. They thought I would be at home crying over loan applications. They thought their gaslighting had worked because I had walked out of the kitchen in silence. They mistook my shock for submission. As I drove toward the club that evening, I felt a strange sense of detachment. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is for people who still hope for a better outcome. I was beyond hope. I was in the realm of consequences. I parked my beat-up car in between a line of gleaming German SUVs. I smoothed out my best dress, one I had bought with my own money from the diner. I gripped the stack of folders. My grandfather was already inside, waiting at the bar, a silent witness to the carnage that was about to unfold. I checked my phone. A text from my mother. "We've told everyone you're feeling under the weather. It's for the best, her. Don't make a scene by showing up now." I didn't reply. I tucked the phone into my bag, pushed open the heavy oak doors of the banquet hall and walked toward the light. I wasn't just finding the missing money. I was about to dismantle a 30-year lie. The room was filled with the low hum of polite conversation. I saw Ryan, glass in hand, laughing with Chloe's father. I saw my mother, her hand resting on my father's shoulder, looking every bit the part of the successful Michigan matriarch. I took a deep breath. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through the laughter like a blade. "I think there's been a mistake on the guest list. I'm not under the weather. I'm here to present the final audit. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Every head turned. My father's face went from pale to a deep, bruising purple. My mother's glass slipped from her hand, shattering against the parquet floor. The injustice gap was about to be closed. And I was the one holding the door. The air in the country club banquet hall was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive cologne, a sensory mask for the rot I was about to expose. My mother had always said that presentation is everything, and as I stood at the entrance I saw she had outdone herself. This was the Bon Voyage dinner, the final grand gesture before the entire family and the Grosse Pointe elite flew to Italy. The room was a sea of white linen, crystal glassware, and the kind of hushed, self-important conversation that only happens in rooms where everyone believes they are untouchable. I walked toward the head table. Every step felt heavy, not with hesitation, but with the weight of the 12 manila folders gripped in my hand. The physical receipts that would silence the gaslighters once and for all. Ryan was mid-laugh, leaning over to whisper something to Chloe, whose diamond necklace caught the light like a taunt. My father, Greg, was standing near the podium, looking every bit the successful insurance executive, his posture radiating a false sense of unearned security. My mother, Diane, was the first to see me. Her smile didn't just fade, it evaporated. She set down her champagne flute with a trembling hand, the glass clinking sharply against the marble tabletop. "Cora," she whispered, her voice a sharp hiss that didn't carry past the immediate table. "I told you to stay home. You're making a scene just by being here. Look at your dress. You look like you just came from a shift at that diner." "I did come from my shift, Mom," I said, my voice steady, projecting to the surrounding tables. "I'm wearing the clothes I bought with my own money. I thought that would fit the theme of the night, the strong start. Isn't that what Dad called it?" My father stepped forward, his face darkening to a bruised purple. "Clear enough. This is your brother's night. This is a celebration of family. If you can't be happy for him, leave. No. Don't embarrass us in front of the Millers." "Oh, I'm very happy for him, Dad," I said, stepping into the center of the room so that the light from the chandelier hit me directly. "I'm so happy that I decided to share the details of how this strong start was financed. Because according to you, this is a collective family investment. And in any investment, the shareholders deserve a report. And since everyone in this room is family, I figured they should see the dividends." I didn't wait for a response. I began walking around the head table, laying a folder in front of my parents, Ryan, Chloe's parents, and my Aunt Martha, the family gossip who I knew would ensure the truth reached every corner of the neighborhood within the hour. "What is this?" Chloe's father asked, his brow furrowed as he looked at the folder labeled Exhibit A, the trust theft. "That," I said, my voice cutting through the room, "is a forensic audit of my $224,000 college fund. The one my grandfather, a retired CPA with 40 years of experience, set up so I wouldn't have to take out the loans my father told me to just get like everyone else 2 nights ago. If you turn to page 3, you'll see the wire transfer initiated by Greg Townsend directly to the villa in Tuscany. It wasn't a package deal, Chloe. It wasn't venue covered. It was my medical school tuition. It was my housing. It was every dollar my grandfather intended for my future, used to buy 3 days of appetizers and a view of the Arno." The room went deathly silent. The only sound was the synchronized rustle of paper as people, driven by a morbid curiosity they couldn't suppress, opened the folders. The injustice gap I had lived in for weeks was finally being filled with cold, hard data. My father reached for my folder, trying to snatch it away, but my grandfather stepped out from the shadows near the bar. "Leave the folder alone, Greg," Arthur said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "I don't recall giving you permission to treat my granddaughter's trust like a personal slush fund. And I certainly don't recall the adult's business involving the $50,000 your wife skimmed into a Cayman account behind your back." My father froze. He turned to my mother, his eyes wide with a mix of confusion and burgeoning rage. What? What came in account? Turn to Exhibit B, Dad, I said, leaning over the table. While you were busy telling me I was materialistic for wanting my own money back, Mom was busy building herself a lifeboat. She didn't just help you spend my tuition. She took a little extra for the consulting fees she's been charging your joint account. She didn't trust your systems any more than I do. The status quo of their marriage didn't just crack. It shattered in front of 200 people. My father grabbed the folder, his hands shaking as he looked at the wire transfers my grandfather had unearthed. The man who had spent 30 years managing risk had failed to see the greatest risk was sitting right next to him, sipping Chardonnay. You took $50,000? My father hissed at my mother, ignoring the guests. While the firm is looking at my bonus pool. While I'm fighting to keep our equity. You were the one skimming from the pool to pay for Ryan's failed gym franchise. She shot back, her voice losing its polished suburban edge and rising to a screech. I saw the statements, Greg. I knew you were draining our home's value to hide his failures from the Millers. I wasn't going to go down with your ship. Wait, what gym franchise? Ryan asked, looking confused and suddenly very small in his custom Italian suit. He looked at Chloe's father, who was now standing up, his face a mask of aristocratic disgust. The one you told me Chloe's parents funded, Ryan, I said, pointing to Exhibit C, page 9. Except they didn't. Dad borrowed, against our home's future, to hide your incompetence from your new in-laws. He didn't want them to know the golden child couldn't even manage a lease. The lies are tiered just like the love in this family. Dad lies to Mom, Mom lies to Dad, and you both lie to the world while standing on my neck. Chloe's father looked at the folders, then at my parents, who were now openly arguing, screaming about secret accounts and corporate bonuses, oblivious to the audience they had spent a lifetime trying to impress. He looked at my father as if he were a bug under a microscope. We were told this was a merger of equals, Mr. Miller said, his voice cold and final. We were told the Townsends were a family of substance. It seems we were actually being asked to join a sinking ship of petty thieves and gaslighters. Chloe, we're leaving. Chloe looked at Ryan, not with love, but with the realization that the man she was about to marry was a puppet built of stolen cash. She didn't say a word. She just took off the engagement ring, placed it on top of the audit folder, and walked out of the hall. Her parents followed, leaving the room in a state of stunned, awkward paralysis. I stood there watching the fallout. My brother was staring at the ring. My mother was crying, not out of regret for what she did to me, but because her social standing was being incinerated in real time. My father was staring at the floor, the manila folder logic finally hitting home. He had no defense against the truth. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was my grandfather. You did well, Cora, he whispered. The truth is a heavy thing, but it's lighter than a lie. I looked at my parents. 2 nights ago they had stood in a kitchen and told me my future didn't matter. They had gaslit me into believing that my hard work was a materialistic obsession and that their betrayal was a family investment. They thought they could use me as a silent foundation for their vanity. But a foundation only works if it stays underground. I had decided to rise. I hope the wedding was worth it, I said, looking at the 3 of them. Because the bank is officially closed. And so am I. I didn't wait for them to find their voices. I didn't need an apology, and I didn't need their permission. I walked out of that country club, past the valets and the luxury cars, and felt the cool night air of Michigan hit my face. For the first time in 18 years, I wasn't the reliable investment or the invisible child. I was just me. Behind me, I could hear the sound of the party dissolving into chaos. The 30-year marriage was dismantling, the golden child was tarnished, and the status quo was dead. I had lost a college fund, but I had gained something much more valuable. The knowledge that no is a complete sentence and that sometimes you have to burn the house down to see the stars. I drove away from the club, leaving the folders behind. They didn't need me anymore. The numbers would do the rest of the work. And in the world of forensic accounting, the numbers never, ever lie. I watched the country club disappear in my rearview mirror, a glowing tomb of suburban dreams. My parents had spent 30 years building a fortress of presentation, and it had taken me exactly 20 minutes and 12 folders to bring it to the ground. I drove straight back to my grandfather's house. The silence there was different now. It wasn't the silence of secrets but the silence of peace. We sat in his study for hours, the light of the desk lamp the only thing illuminating the room. We didn't need to speak. The audit was complete. The receipts were on the table. And for the first time in my life, the balance was exactly where it needed to be. The aftermath of that night at the country club didn't just feel like a family argument. It felt like the final scene of a high-stakes thriller where the building is rigged to blow, and I was the only one with the map to the exit. When you pull the primary thread of a 30-year fabrication, you don't just get a confession, you get a total, irreversible collapse of the social and financial structures that defined your life. My parents had spent 3 decades meticulously crafting an image of suburban perfection. They had the lawn, the club membership, and the golden child, who was supposed to marry into a legacy. Within 48 hours of my presentation, the neighbors in Shelby Township weren't waving from their driveways anymore. They were whispering behind closed curtains as the legal machinery began to grind my parents' world into dust. The first domino to fall was my father's career, and it fell with a deafening thud. The Grosse Pointe crowd that attended the dinner wasn't just a collection of social peers. They were his primary clients, his golf partners, and most importantly, the people who sat on the board of directors at his regional insurance firm. By Monday morning, the rumors of corporate skimming, fiduciary breach, and creative accounting had reached the compliance department. My father, the man of systems, had forgotten the most basic rule of insurance. You can't insure yourself against your own greed. He was called into a private meeting at 10 a.m. By 10:15 a.m. he was placed on indefinite administrative leave pending an internal investigation. By the following Friday, after the firm's investigators corroborated the Exhibit C documents my grandfather and I had provided, he was escorted out of the building by security. The cardboard box he carried contained the remnants of a 30-year career, a Manager of the Year trophy and a desk calendar. The man who had managed risk for a living had become the ultimate liability, and the firm moved with surgical precision to distance itself from the stench of his creative bonuses. Then came the dismantling of the marriage. My mother didn't just move into the guest room. She moved into a high-rise condo in Birmingham using the funds from the secret Cayman account my father hadn't known existed until I laid it on the table. But the lifeboat she had built for herself was full of holes. Because the $50,000 consulting fee had been routed through her real estate business, it triggered a secondary investigation by the state licensing board. They didn't see a savvy woman looking out for herself. They saw a broker commingling personal and professional funds. Within 2 months, her license was suspended, and the woman who defined herself by her social standing found herself unable to even sell a starter home. I stayed with my grandfather, Arthur, during the carnage. His house, once a quiet sanctuary of spreadsheets and peppermint tea, became the war room for the reconstruction of my life. We didn't just talk about the past. We mapped out the future with the same cold forensic logic he used to audit corporations. He helped me hire a lawyer who specialized in trust litigation. We filed a formal suit against my father for breach of fiduciary duty. The goal wasn't just to get the money back. It was to ensure that the legal record reflected exactly what they had done. We weren't going to let them spin this as a misunderstanding. The most painful part, strangely, wasn't the rage from my parents. It was the absolute hollow silence from Ryan. The golden child had been stripped of his shine, and without the gold, there was nothing underneath. With the wedding cancelled and Chloe's family threatening a lawsuit of their own to recover their deposits and reputational damages, Ryan retreated into the only thing he knew, the role of the victim. He sent me one long rambling email at 3 a.m. It was filled with typos and bitter accusations. He blamed me for ruining his chance at a real life. He claimed that if I had just stayed in my lane, he would have been part of the Miller family and he would have eventually paid me back. He couldn't, or wouldn't, understand that a real life isn't something you buy with someone else's tuition. He ended up moving into a dingy studio apartment in a part of town my mother wouldn't even drive through. He took a job at a local hardware store. Honest, grueling work that he spent his entire life trying to avoid. The speculative asset had finally been forced to face its own market value. 3 months after the audit, the divorce was finalized. It was a brutal, televised affair in our small community. The house in Shelby Township, the one with the perfect lawn and the designer kitchen where my parents told me to take out loans, was sold at a loss to pay off the debts, the legal fees and the reclaimed trust funds. I remember driving past it one last time on the day the new owners moved in. The for sale sign was gone, replaced by a moving truck for a young family who had no idea about the ghosts that lived in the drywall. I didn't feel sad. I felt like the air was finally clear enough to breathe. My grandfather stood by me as I signed the papers for my first semester at the University of Michigan. I wasn't going in with a massive unearned cushion anymore. The court had managed to recover about $180,000 of the original fund after the liquidation of my parents' assets. The rest, the other $44,000, was gone, dissolved into the Tuscan air, the silk of a wedding dress, and the vanity of two people who forgot that a family is not a business. But that $180,000 felt heavier, more real, and more precious than the $224,000 ever had. It was no longer a gift from a distant past. It was a trophy from a battle I had fought and won. My name is Cora Townsend. I'm 19 now and I'm a sophomore in the pre-med program. I still work at the diner on weekends, even though my grandfather told me I didn't have to. I work because I never want to forget the value of a dollar I earned with my own hands. I work because it reminds me that I am the architect of my own security. My parents don't speak to each other and they rarely speak to me. My father is working as an independent insurance consultant, struggling to find clients who don't know his name from the headlines. My mother is fighting a losing battle to keep her condo as the legal fees mount. They lost their 30-year marriage, their social standing, and their peace of mind. But as my grandfather says, you can't lose what you never truly had. They had a facade, I have a life. I realize that the injustice gap isn't closed by getting back every cent or getting a public apology that would never be sincere. It's closed by the moment you realize your worth isn't a line item on someone else's balance sheet. I was the kid who didn't ask for much, but I learned that the most important thing to ask for, the only thing worth having, is the truth. I realized that my parents didn't dismantle their marriage because of a folder I handed out. They dismantled it one secret at a time over 30 years. I just happened to be the one who turned on the lights. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. It's been a long, exhausting road from that cold kitchen in Shelby Township to the lecture halls in Ann Arbor, but I'm finally standing on my own 2 feet. This story isn't just about a missing $224,000. It's about the moment you decide that no is a complete sentence and that your future is worth more than someone else's presentation. If this story made you feel something, whether it was the heat of rage at the betrayal or the cool relief of justice, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been the reliable investment, while someone else got to be the golden child? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the family peace and keeping your own soul? Drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories remind me that the invisible children of the world are actually the strongest ones in the room. If you know someone who is being gaslit by their family or someone who is being told to sacrifice for a sibling who never gives back, please share this video with them. Sometimes seeing the receipts in someone else's hands is the only thing that gives you the courage to start looking for your own. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. I've linked 2 more stories in the description about narrative reclamation and the power of setting boundaries that I think will really resonate with you. I'm Cora and I'm glad you're here. Until next time, remember, keep your eyes open, keep your head up, and always keep the receipts. The truth always has a way of balancing the books in the end.